Recorded live from the mats of Radical MMA in New York City. The Martial Culture Podcast. Your source for in-depth combat sports and martial arts insights with Coach Rene and Matt Peters. Ring the bell and let's get it on.
That was the longest 10 seconds of my life. You don't realize how long 10 seconds is until you're actually waiting 10 seconds.
There's an interesting thing that says that 10 seconds is all relative. When it's 10 seconds of pure pain or boredom, it can forever. But if it's 10 seconds of something amazing, it goes by like that. So
relativity, sir.
Yeah, our sense of time is always relative. It's kind of an interesting thing.
That's too highbrow for this show. That's too much knowledge.
No, we're like the NPR of MMA. That's what people said. Did you read the review? NPR of MMA. You got to be highbrow.
Well, that's
a little
you.
bit.
I'm the Comedy Central of MMA.
You're the Comedy Central. So anyway,
we're back again.
We're back.
Let's get right into it. We have a great guest on the show.
Fantastic
again
guest.
For you guys.
I am so incredibly happy to have introduced you guys, our listeners, to Professor Dennis Ashe, who I was incredibly fortunate enough to have met in Brazil and trained with him. Dennis, if you could say hello to everybody and tell us a little bit about your martial arts background. I know you started in Jeet Kune Do, and you know how you got started in the martial arts. And I think everybody's going to find your journey super inspiring. I know, as I was saying before the phone break, you really, really touched me when I went down to Brazil. I was. I didn't know anybody. It was like a little bit, I wouldn't say unfriendly, but you don't know anybody. And you took me under your wing. You're like, okay, let's meet 7 a.m. and train. And still to this day, the techniques that you taught me and the friendship you showed me, that's what martial arts is about. It's like friendship and connection and helping. And I've never met such a wonderful martial arts technique, but also in terms of personality and who you are and the way you carry yourself. I kind of like, when I say like what kind of martial arts I want to be, and it's like, yeah, I want to be like Dennis. That's always like kind of in my heart, So it's just so great to have you here and just reconnect on this podcast. And I hope people can find you as inspirational as I always have found you. So anyway, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in the martial arts, and then we could just take it from there.
All right. Well, my name is Dennis Ashe, and Rene, Matt, thank you both, gentlemen, for having me on your show. It's an honor for me, and thank you for all those kind words to start things going. I couldn't stop smiling just listening to you guys open this show up. You guys both got great personalities, and it's a pleasure to be on the show. So a little bit about myself. I did start out when I was 7 years old in Kempo Karate in Bend, Oregon. That's my hometown, and from there, it led on to several other traditional styles of martial arts and eventually into JKD, which was brought about by watching that first UFC back in 1993 and just seeing the effectiveness of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and being able to see people putting things together and being able to take advantage of the most effective ranges of fighting.
Yeah, and I think people don't realize in 92, it was like JKD was just before the UFC, the only people who were talking about America of mixing styles was JKD. And I think their approach was maybe flawed, but it was like the idea of like cross-training. If you weren't in JKD, you didn't cross-train, Like, it's like that's kind of how people approached cross-training back then, right? Would you agree?
100%. Yeah, I agree. That's and that's what really got me into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Thai boxing and my training through JKD. My instructor, Pat Lackman, had pointed me in the right direction as far as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and introduced me to Jean-Jacques Machado and Bong San-Kyoten down there at MTA USA in North Hollywood. And I left my home in Central Oregon to go down there and train because I was seeking higher training. I wanted another level. I didn't want to end up being a big fish in a small bowl. I wanted to go out there and
Didn't you hitchhike down to LA or something like that? Is that if I remember the story correctly, you just like packed up your bags?
I thought you said you hitchhiked to Brazil.
Oh, really?
Yes, sir.
How did you do that?
I did. That was I had spent about a year down in LA and I'd come back up to Oregon. And in 2001, summer of 2001, I hitchhiked down there. I remember still looking up at the the clear blue sky with a few of the white clouds up there on Highway 97 as I face south, and just looking at the highway, ready to go.
That is
I had
super.
$10 in my pocket and a change of clothes and my training gear. That was it. My bag.
This is just so awesome. It's like a story like the Ronin wandering the old highways of Japan,
Did
going
you
for
solve
training.
any crimes on the way, or save any damsels in distress? The renegade.
That's what it felt like. It felt like an adventure, and it was. It truly was an adventure. Getting down there the first time, I went down to MTA USA, and I remember when I had called my Muay Thai crew, and they had okayed it for me to stay at the gym, and I got down there. It took a while. When I got down there, I called them from a payphone. This is, back in the era, there were still quite a few payphones on the street, and they said, "Hurry up, we got dinner ready." And I didn't want to spend my $10 to get across town, so I walked across town from Sunset Boulevard into North Hollywood. And anybody that's familiar with LA knows it's a trek.
That's a really long walk.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And then, so you were focusing a little bit on Muay Thai in the beginning, right?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was my focus when I got down. I really wanted to work on my striking. I of course I wanted to develop my ground game as well, but I was really focused on stand up. And a good friend who I had met through MTA USA, Josh Lazy, introduced me to John Machado, where he was training at the time. And John had just opened up a really small academy on the Miracle Mile in the Wilshire district.
Oh, I know the one you're talking about. Yeah. He is not there anymore, right? No, he's long
No,
gone,
he's
right?
not. He's in Texas now.
Yeah.
He's in Allen, Texas. But at the time, it was an amazing experience, and Professor John Machado took me under his wing, and he broke down my game. I remember when I first went in there, I had a hard-headed. I was already fighting MMA, so I was pretty hard-headed. I got in there, and I was like, I need to kill everyone. I need to take everyone apart. So I went at it, and fairly new students, and I was. After I got done rolling, he said, "Oh, my friend, come here. Let's roll." And he proceeded to just grind me into the mat. And
Yeah. And
honestly, I don't think he liked me a lot at first, but he saw
really.
Super.
It's funny. I actually, the five brothers. So the listeners don't know, there are five Machado brothers, and their mother. Sister was married to Carlos Gracie, and so they're like by marriage cousins of the Gracies, and they grew up very close with the Gracies. I had the pleasure of sharing the mats with Higan Machado, and he's the second oldest, I believe. And then there's John Machado, John Jacques Machado, Hojer Machado, and I think, am I missing one? Higan. Hojer, John, and
Roger,
Carlos. Carlos, right. And the interesting thing is that all games are very different. Their personalities are completely different, and but together they're like this, the five deadly venoms. They're just amazing.
Oh yeah,
and that some of the nicest people. When you meet them, the first time I walked in the Machado Academy, I was like maybe a little intimidated. It was just. Everyone was so nice and just truly wanting to help and teach you. And, when I came from judo, I think you probably felt the same thing. When you come from another martial art and you're like, oh, you want to cross train. Back in the day in the 90s, it was like jiu-jitsu, especially from the Gracie family side, was a little bit like, do I want to step into this academy? Are they going to kill me? Especially I was a judo guy. So there was like, this, like, are they going to, F me up? And there was the complete opposite. They're just like, welcome, because the Machados were not like that. They were always like, we want to cross train, we want to build relationships with other styles, and I just think I would thank them for that, because that hospitality is something that I always try to have in my academy when I have other people coming in from other styles. It's like whatever style you studied, you're welcome. Obviously, there's technical differences, but if you welcome people with open arms, it can only be a good thing. And I'm very, very gratified for that. And I'll tell you, many martial arts academies I went to before, when you do a different style, it's not like that. Like they're like, we have to kill you now. So
I understand 100%.
Yeah. So, but I'm sure you had a smile the whole time he was rolling with you, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah, as he ground me in the mat, he was smiling, and he's always an amazing professor. And that was one of the things that you just said is 100% true. And the fact that he was real big on maintaining, because he knew I trained daily my Thai boxing. He says, don't stop doing that. He said it's important that you train your Thai boxing and that you cross train and you maintain a level of functionality and maintain your skill set in that. At the same time, you're training jiu-jitsu. And at the time, you're absolutely right. In the late 90s, early 2000s, it was most jiu-jitsu academies are like, that's it. That's the end all is your jiu-jitsu. You don't need to train anything else. And he was ahead of the game in that aspect, and he always greeted everyone with open arms, and he broke my game down completely and built it back up into what eventually got me to Brazil.
When did you start training with Jean-Jacques?
That would have been the late 90s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that would have been late 90s, and then I went back to Oregon, and then came back down to Los Angeles, and that's when I started training at John's.
Oh, got it.
Yeah.
And you had already had a number of Vale Tudo fights. I actually knew you before I knew you because I had this this old video. I think it was called like 101 submissions. And yeah, you know, right? And you're like right in the middle. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God, that's so cool, that move. And then when I met you,
forgot about that.
Yeah, it's only after I left Brazil, I'm like, oh my God, that's him. You know, like that's the guy. It was this moment, right? And it was you finished with the Kimura, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I remember. I like watched that video of you doing that Kimura probably like 100 times, and I started trying to copy it because it was so good. But what was it like fighting like in the Vale Tudo in America way back in the you know the early ages of before MMA was kind of like quote unquote sanitized? What was it like back then?
Well, number one, if you fight, you really loved fighting because there wasn't a lot of money in it. So if you did it for love of your heart, and it was to prove something to yourself, and just because you enjoyed doing your thing. And there were very, very few rules, and as it wasn't legal, the fights were held primarily on Indian reservations where the federal government didn't have jurisdiction, and that's where most of my fights happened.
And how many
fights?
Great. How many?
It was a lot of fun.
Before you went to Brazil, how many fights did you have? If you don't mind me asking.
I had, let's see, I had 7 fights before I went to Brazil.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah, not a huge number, but it was enough to give me a good eye opener into what I was looking forward to doing in the future. And that was another big thing being with John Machado, not to stray off the subject, but when I got to John Machado's training as a blue belt, he had told me to, he said, I'm not your dad, I'm not your boss. He said, but there's something that I believe that you should do is focus on your jiu-jitsu. And build up your ground game and really work that before moving on in MMA. He said, I want you to be at least a purple belt before you fight MMA. And I said, no problem. I said, I trust you. I believe you. And he never led me astray. That really, the jiu-jitsu training was something that made all the difference in the world for me. And like I said, it got me to Brazil, and it's what essentially created the life that I have now today, and the academies that I have.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
So this is a moment
Absolutely.
where I have to say, Dennis is being way too humble.
Uh-oh.
One of the reasons he went to Brazil was because the Gracies had this incredibly big tournament where if you won it, you got a free trip. And it was like the hardest, most intense grappling tournament in the history
Mortal
of all.
Kombat.
Yeah, basically, because they allowed slams. It was no time limit. It was there's no points. If you're like, it was like hour-long fights. It was like the most crazy grappling tournament ever. Mm-hmm. There's never been any other grappling tournament like it.
I went to Brazil.
Yeah, you went to Brazil. No,
I got
won.
a plane ticket. No, you won Mortal Kombat.
Exactly. What was that tournament like? I know you won it, and then of course, was it Henner won it as well as a kid or something?
Yeah,
and a couple other guys.
Yeah, there was there were Elliot Marshall.
Elliot Marshall, that's right, from Colorado.
Yeah. Yes, there was a
fought in the UFC.
I had several teammates as well that were in that. Chris from Street Sports, he's got an academy down in Studio City now, I believe. He was in it too. He won.
He's Chris from Renato Magno's academy, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. I know who you're talking about.
Justin from over in Las Vegas. He was Mika's student at the time. We had there was a good group. And they all won their respective divisions, and we got to share that experience, that's one of the things I tell till today, it was a life-changing experience, and that's what the JiuJitsu Championship was supposed to be right from the start. It was that was the big deal. It was if you guys win, this is going to be a life-changing experience, and it definitely was for me. Just being able to go through that. First off, like you said, the championship was awesome.
Tell us about it. I know it was like grueling. I mean, unbelievable fights there.
It was. It was one of the things that really got people to open their games up, because they knew that you weren't going to win just by passing guard and hanging out or outpointing the other guy, unless it was they actually did have a rule if you got more than 12 points ahead of the other person. So they did have a point system. But if you got more than 12 points ahead, then they would call the match.
That's actually interesting. It's like a technical win in wrestling. They do that. If you outpoint the guy enough, you basically win the match. I forgot what it's like, a technical win or something, technical fall. Or something. Yeah. I like that idea where it's like almost submission only, but not quite submission only. It's like nice, interesting hybrid. And there were also slams allowed too, right?
Yeah, slams were allowed.
That's crazy.
It was.
And how many fights? How many matches did you have?
I think 5 to win the final.
And do you remember them at all? Do you remember the finals?
Maybe 6.
Yeah.
Finals, yes. Final was Jeff Glover in my division, and he had submitted everyone in his leading up to that, and I had a 22-minute match with him, I think. You
fought Jeff Glover? I had no idea.
Yeah.
So for the guys who don't know, Jeff Glover's like super famous jiu-jitsu stud, and you beat him.
Yeah.
Wow.
We talked about.
Amazing.
I did slam him in the end and passed his guard and won. But
we had a funny joke at the beginning about.
I got kind of. I'll be honest with you. After 22 minutes, I didn't think that there was any way that he was going to be able to submit me. And that guy is crafty. He's got very good jiu-jitsu, and he shot up a triangle. And I thought two ways. Okay, I'm gonna work to defend it, or I'm gonna take the path of least resistance. So I just slammed him, and that was the end of story.
But it's funny because I come from a judo background, and the thing is, if you get put in a triangle and they lift you off the floor, you have to let it go. Like you lose. Like you have to let that's
right.
Yeah. And I kind of like that rule too, where they don't allow slams, but they're like, if I can pick you up, I could smash your head on the concrete. So therefore, like sometimes I feel like, and don't get me started on this topic, but I feel like sport jiu-jitsu has gone down this like weird rabbit hole of lack of functionality in combat. And so like you guys do these things where they just sit there and they allow guys to do stuff that on the self-defense can counter an MMA would just not be smart. So while that slam rule is a little crazy in terms of safety, I think it's really cool because it's like, man, if you do a triangle and you're not holding on to the guy's leg or finding a way to not get your head slammed on the concrete, that triangle's not good for you. Yeah.
I agree with you in that. I think the rules in sport jiu-jitsu now are making the sport itself watered down. And back to that, like in that final, I know how to really hurt somebody. I could have jumped on top of his head or something. I didn't do that. I slammed him on his back intentionally because I didn't want to permanently damage him or something. I just wanted to open the triangle up. So, that said, in hindsight, maybe I wouldn't have slammed. Maybe I would have worked to defend it more, but that was the path of least resistance.
Oh.
And in today's sport, you're 100% right. I do believe that our jiu-jitsu is like with the leg reaping and all these things that it just keeps getting more and more and more watered down to the point where it's at some points it's ridiculous.
One thing I have to say also, like I basically online stalk you. I admit it. I'm a fan, and I watched the blue belt test that you had. And I love that you make guys do like a kind of MMA match to get their blue belt. Like, that's great.
Oh, absolutely.
It's like, why does everybody do that? Like, you see right away what's real and what's not. And you see who's ready for blue and who's not. It's great for you to do that. It's so real and so important to keep our roots, back in fighting. When I started jiu-jitsu, everybody on the mat I was training with was like, I want to fight, or I'm interested in fighting, or I'm interested in self-defense. It wasn't like, I'm just like, I want to roll, I want to burn some calories or, whatever. It was like, we're here to study violence. And I miss those days.
Right.
I miss them,
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I would see it as an injustice if we didn't do a couple of things. Number one, everyone has to know how to close the gap and take a person down. That's period. If you train in my academy, you have to know how to take down and throw. It just goes without saying. I would be doing an injustice to people telling them that they're learning something that's applicable in self-defense if they don't know how to take the fight to the ground, or if they don't know how to avoid being taken down. It's extremely important. And then once more on that, when we test, it's one of those things where you have to be able to take a punch. You need to be able to close the gap and take that person down. And I do it without the testees aren't allowed to strike back. So they have to close that gap and take the person down without punching or kicking back.
That's actually very hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. You have a tendency to want to, okay, I got hit, I want to hit him back, but especially if you got a striking background, but it's something that makes it even more challenging. And we had, I had our first women's test this last weekend too. My wife tested for her purple belt. And so there were some other standards that we've added and applied. And she kind of set the bar for other women in the fact that not only is there technical self-defense, there is live self-defense application where the woman has to get back up to her feet from an opponent who's trying to hold them down, and as well as they have to take down a striking opponent. But it's different. You don't see a lot of women's fights where they're coming at you as like a good boxer or something like that. They're grabbing hair and they're slapping.
Right.
So that's what the difference in the women's self-defense or live application. The woman has to take down another woman who's empty hand slapping and trying to grab on. So it made a huge difference. And I'm super proud of my wife, Jo Sarah, for doing an awesome job and passing into her purple belt this last weekend. So
fantastic.
It helps, like I said, to set the bar for future tests.
Fantastic. No, it's interesting because I follow a lot of crime statistics, and you see gender equivalent assault, male, gender equivalent assault, female, are incredibly different in the way they play out. And gender non-equivalent assault is also different, male on female and female on male. They're just completely different. So when we're talking self-defense, you have to talk your terms. Well, who's attacking who? What patterns are most likely when it's a guy attacking a girl? Well, obviously, it's probably going to be either robbery related, kidnap related, or sexual assault related. So it's going to play out very differently. It's not guys not going to square up and start throwing, punches. It's different. So
exactly.
Yeah. So you have to when I teach, I gender the curriculums. Okay, women have to learn this part of the self-defense first. At the end of the day, everybody learns everything, but you have to learn this first because this is what's most important for you. Now, that being said, I make everybody learn everything, but it's where do you start, And so it's kind of important. But then, so I don't want to take the time away from you. So you went down to Brazil, and I know you trained with Elio Gracie. What was that like? That was pretty amazing.
I did. That was amazing. That was a life-changing experience. And until today, I thank the Gracie family for putting on that tournament, and Orion for introducing me to Rio de Janeiro, and being able to stay with Elio. It was amazing. Of course, Hiro and Henner, they were great tour guides too, and Halleck as well. But anyway, it was an amazing experience. I mean, first off, Elio at the time he only spoke a few words in English, so it was there's probably a lot more things I would have asked him now that I speak fluent Portuguese. But it was just I can't even describe the feeling of being able to train with one of the founding fathers of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in their home, and learning, he was huge on basics. He was really big. I mean, it's still at 3 years old when I was down there, man, he had a great grip strength, and that guy moved around. You wouldn't believe he didn't just walk; he ran. He was always doing it. People say, "Well, how do you stay so healthy?" And he'd be doing air squats, and he'd jump out of his car. He was still driving. He drove like a Mario Andretti or something, eating around.
No, his X choke is I've never seen anything like. The only person who comes close is maybe Roger Gracie, but he does it from the mount, and Elio would hang like a monkey off your neck. I never trained with Elio, but I was present at one of his seminars. I had an injured knee, but he was teaching at Kyoto BJJ in New York, and I went and watched, but I couldn't participate because I had torn my ACL. But just watching him and just roll, you're like, oh my God, this guy's he's legit. That's the thing. It's I talk about all these old masters, and you meet them and you're like, yeah, you're full of shit. And then you meet this old guy who's in his 90s, and you're like, oh my God, this guy could still kill me.
Who's full of shit? Renee never names names. Who's full of shit, Renee?
I can say it right now. I can say it right now, but I don't want.
He's mouthing the words. I won't tell.
None of our listeners will tell. No, but and then I know after you went back and then you moved back down to Brazil, and this is
I did.
Yeah, this is something that you and I share, and it's one thing that when we were talking, when I went down to Rio and I stayed in this place called On the Mat, which was a dorm. And Dennis was like running it, helping out. And we just started talking, and then went to get some sushi, and we're talking, and you had a very similar experience to me. I know it was like kind of a very tragic thing, but the minute you get there and you suffered a very, debilitating accident, can you tell what it was like and how you overcame that? This is why you're so inspiring to me.
Yeah, absolutely. That, well, first off, I definitely want to thank Scotty from On the Mat. He helped me to get situated and helped out a lot, and he allowed me to manage his place when he'd go back and forth to the States and be filming. And he was one of the pioneers.
Yeah, and he doesn't get enough thanks. Like way back when, there was like before video YouTube, like it would be Scotty and a couple other guys who would like film a tournament in Brazil.
Dengue fever.
Yeah. And then you'd be like, and you download it, and you'd be like, oh my God, I actually saw a tournament from Brazil. But it was like that's the only thing. They had this little bastion of Americans in Rio. It was the only way to get the information back up, other than like a local blue belt or something like that. Obviously, there's some black belts at that time, but they were very, very few and far between.
There was no YouTube.
No YouTube.
That's a lot of people take for granted now. I mean, YouTube didn't come around until 2005, so it was, yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to new white belts, though, I kind of wish there was no YouTube. I'm like, stop watching YouTube and just do what I tell you.
Yeah.
You cannot do the Berimbolo yet. No.
Yeah, no. No. Yeah.
It's a love-hate relationship I have with YouTube.
Yeah. But getting down there, so when I came back to the States, I sold everything I had, and I went back down there and that was in 2003. And I had the intent of, now that I was a purple belt, I was going to start fighting MMA again. And I got accepted onto the first Vale Tudo team there in Gracie, Baja. And this is back when there was only one Gracie, Baja in the world, and it was in Baja da Tijuca. And it was an amazing place to train at the time. There were so many world champions there. It was nuts. Anyway, so I got back down there, and we had Daryl Golar training our squad for wrestling, and we had a couple of good, solid striking coaches, and of course the jiu-jitsu was Gordo, and about 2-3 weeks into training, just day in and day out. We went in and they had the Jet Power Tatami mats, and I had a pair of wrestling shoes on, which I shouldn't have had on that surface during wrestling class. And Soka, Alexandre Soka, was my partner, and we were drilling or positional takedown sparring off of the double leg, and my foot got caught on the mat, twisted around backwards, and I got a really bad spiral fracture. And back then it was one of those things too. I heard the crack, and I knew something wasn't right, but I've sprained my ankles and broken toes and fingers and ribs and nose and concussions and all that stuff. And I just figured, this isn't that bad. If I can get up and walk, then it's okay. So 2 guys dragged me off the mat and tossed me a bottle of lukewarm water to cool off my ankle with. And then at the end of the session, which was about another half hour later, I stood up and I was like, okay, it can't be broken. I can still walk on it. It was pretty bad though. I refused to go in there for a week. And that was at the time, Pete the Greek was down there. He was staying in Copacabana. So Scotty and I had gone over there to visit him. And I remember my foot was so swollen up, I couldn't get it in my shoe. I'd have to cram it in my shoe, opening the shoelaces. And then I'd try to squeeze the blood out of it by tying it really tight. And finally a week later, I got talked into going to get it x-rayed, and it was a really bad spiral fracture, and there was pieces of bone broken off in there. And I was lucky it didn't go through the skin. It turned into a compound fracture. And I was devastated because I went from training 6 days a week, and Monday through Friday, I trained 6 to 8 hours a day. And on Saturday, that was my light day, I trained an average of 3 or 4 hours. And I didn't know what to do with myself. I said, what the heck am I going to do now? And I had brought just enough money to survive for 2 months until I could fight. and that was out of the question. So I really had to think on what I was going to do in the meantime. And, so I started teaching English and teaching jiu-jitsu and selling kimonos and doing whatever I could do to just stay afloat in the meantime, which is really tough. And that's what, and like I said, I was thankful to have Scotty there to allow me to manage on the mat house. And they had talked me into it. They said, you know what, you should get a place and start renting out rooms and doing that thing. And he and
so that's how Connection Rio got started.
That's how Connection Rio got started. Yes,
no
sir.
kidding.
That's
I didn't know that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I did in the first house. It wasn't called Connection Rio. I didn't develop it the same way I did as I eventually did in 2009, like much later down the road. But this was in 2004. The first house was set up, and I had that going on. It was a lot of fun. I took in some great people.
Yeah, I know a few
Travis
people who are down there with you, and they said they just had an amazing time. I'd always meant to go down, and I was always meant to, and then you moved back up. but you had a beautiful setup. You're like a great house, and you really took care of it. What I really liked, it was, and on the mat was great, but what I really liked is that everybody likes you, Dennis. And that's a really rare thing. And I know you went to like BTT, and people would want to go to BTT. Then you go to Gordo's, and then you go to Baja, and then you go to Umaita. And, I don't know anybody in the jiu-jitsu community that can say they don't like you. Everybody likes you and knows you. And when you took all the people visiting down and took care of them, I happen to know someone who was there, and they it was like they're not really like a friend, but like an acquaintance or just talking, and they just had nothing but amazing things to say about what you did there. And it was just fantastic that you did that. It was great for the community.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that was a big thing for me too, is bringing a lot of academies together that hadn't been brought together before. And as you know very well, I don't know if what level of understanding that most of your listeners have, but in the 90s, 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s, if you cross-trained at another gym, it was completely frowned on. Right after I got down there in 2003, I trained with an athlete from another gym just because I needed a higher level of boxing. And when I came back to train at Gracie Baja, I had a black eye from training. They're like, where did you get that from? What's going on? You're
yeah, I remember you told me that story.
The techniques, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, well, all of those guys now, they cross train all the time, but back in the day, they didn't understand.
And they were really pissed at you. I remember you told me that story.
Oh,
they were like going to kick you out.
They were
right.
pissed. Oh
yeah.
They were ready to kick me out of the.
I remember
the Valley Judo team, and
there was that one guy, we won't say his name, but that one guy who was mean mugging you on the mat all the time. And I remember you saying he's still pissed because we won't say his name, but we know who it is.
Oh yeah. We got through all of that crap, but it's it did. It meant a lot to me to be able to bring these academies together. I mean, we trained at all of the top academies in Rio de Janeiro. I brought people to all of them, both Luta Livre and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I'd even, gone as far as being able to create or rebuild some friendships from Jiu-Jitsu professors and athletes that wouldn't even look at each other, or they just acknowledge the presence of the other one, and it was amazing to me to be able to get down there. These were people in the 90s that I looked at, like Valij and the Minotauro brothers and all these guys that they were just like, oh man, I wish someday that I could meet these guys in person. Pretty, they were in my Rolodex, and they're people that I would talk to on a regular basis. And it was a very amazing experience for me because Mario Sperry, Gordo, all these people that, it was amazing for me, and a very unique and unforgettable, life-changing experience having lived down there.
Wow. And you were there for what, in 8 years? 9 years?
12 years.
Oh, 12 years. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I do have one question. Can I interrupt?
Yes,
how crazy is Valij?
He's crazy.
He's pretty crazy, right?
So I got to see behind the scenes in some of the production of some of his jungle fights and his negotiations. Like when he took a jungle fight into Cidade de Deus, which is, if you've seen the movie, it's nuts. in that area. It was one of the most dangerous areas of the city. And he took Jungle Fight in there, and he had spectators from all different walks of life in there. And I was fortunate enough in that scenario, we took a group of people from Connection Rio to go watch the fights there, which was crazy. We had talk about another level of corruption as well, leaving the fights. And this is a place where taxis, generally speaking, don't even want to go because they're afraid of getting robbed. I spoke with the military police because I speak Portuguese, so I talked them into getting some taxis for us. And it turns out that when the taxi showed up, they're like, "Wow, it's going to be X amount of reais to get back to the hostel." And they wanted to charge us like 4 or 5 times what it was. And I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, I know better than that what the fare is." And they go, "We have to." They said, "The police held us at gunpoint and told us that if we don't charge you this much and give them a kickback, then we're going to have problems."
Oh man, and that's crazy. Brazil was. I wasn't there for very long, but it's a pretty crazy place. And I know that's amazing that he went into the City of God to do that. It's like that's one of the things that I like about certain members of the jiu-jitsu community is they really don't forget where they came from, and they try to give back a lot. That's a wonderful thing. So that's fantastic. I also want to say that aren't you the only non-Brazilian to train with the Bope?
I don't know now. That might
we
not
were the
be
first.
now, but yeah, we had. I was fortunate enough. So I knew they were out there, and I really wanted to get arrange a tour or to be able to have the people from Connection Rio go up there and check out Bope. And I walked up to this guard. There's a sign there that says don't make any sudden movements. As you walk up there to 2 guys holding their assault rifles up in a tower.
Actually, before you go on, can you explain to our listeners exactly what Bope is? Because I think some people may not have seen the movie Elite Squad or not familiar.
Yeah. So Bope is it's their elite police troop, and they generally speaking, they only call Bope when things get so bad that they just need a squad to go in there and finish off whoever's opposing the police or whatever. And they're not known for taking any prisoners at all. I went into this place. They're like just as a insight as well. They're not even allowed to smile in photos. When you take a photo of their stuff, if they're in the photo, they're not allowed to smile. It's a part of their code of conduct. And so I went up to these guys and talked to them and was able to arrange a meeting with one of their commanding officers and get the first tour of foreigners to be able to go through there, or at least civilian foreigners to be able to go through there and see their the quartel in Rio. And it was pretty amazing. We got to do something that was nobody had done before and see the inside of that, which eventually led to being able to go up there and train. And I think a good friend of mine, Anton JiuJitsu, who is a Brazilian Olympic wrestler who was going up there consistently to train, and he brought me with him, and we got, myself and he was able to train up on the mats in there. It was really good, really great experience.
And they have some serious training. As some people may not realize, but a lot of our counterterrorism people went down to Brazil to train with the Bope because they're so amazing at urban warfare. They're like the best urban warfare troop in the world. Like, because the favelas are usually on hills, so they're always fighting at a tremendous disadvantage. And their ability they train, Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, everything. They just train everything, and their ability to get out of these hairy situations is just unparalleled. I'm not really that well versed in what they do, but I know in military circles they're extremely respected.
Oh yeah, they were. I heard some stories from those guys and things that they would do and some of their tactics and I remember thinking I still one of the things they were talking about is leading up to when they're called into action. Okay, you guys are gonna advance on this position here. They'd hide in a little tunnel, like in the sewer or something, for 3 days, and they couldn't move. They'd be like chest to back. There'd be a group of them, 8-10 of these guys, just waiting for the signal to go in and take over this area. It was nuts. And Alemão was one of the places that we got a tour of as well. And, that was nuts. That was even worse than Cidade de Deus. And, they took that over and they were showing where they had fortified this place. And, they ran into some heavy resistance. Like the drug cartel had, they had anti-aircraft guns, and they were shooting through the concrete barriers at the police as they came up the hill after them. And, it was pretty crazy.
Anti-aircraft
You can
guns.
still see the holes in
Crazy.
I'm talking about concrete divides, and they were shot right through them with their anti-aircraft gun. It was crazy.
Wow.
That's, yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was
Yeah.
a very unique experience.
And
too.
I heard all of them, they're all really, really good at jiu-jitsu. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it varies, but I heard they take their combat training, unarmed combat training, very seriously.
They do.
Yeah.
They do take it very seriously. Yeah, some of their guys are very tough. I had had the pleasure of training with a number of them. Yeah, definitely. They those guys, any kind of elite troop in the world, and they're training every day of the year.
Yeah.
Those guys, both armed and unarmed combat, they're always ready.
Yeah.
They're always ready.
Did they teach you the secret handshake? Do you know that?
The secret handshake.
Yeah. Oh, you don't know that? Okay. I can show it to you sometime.
Yeah.
So you left
Yeah,
Brazil and went back home to Bend, and you started up your academy there. And how long? You have been 4 years now, 5 years now since you moved back?
No, not even that. I got back in 2016, spring of 2016. So, yeah, it hasn't even been 4 or 5 years yet. It's it was a very I spent 10 years straight in Brazil before I came back. Like I said, I had over 12 years in Brazil, but I had spent 10 years straight. So when the adjustment back into the American culture and getting back here, not to mention just coming back and seeing my hometown, which had changed drastically since when I was a kid, and it was pretty amazing. And one of the
reverse culture shock. Yeah, I had the same thing when I came back from Japan. I lived in Japan for many years, and I came back. I'm like, this doesn't feel like home anymore. This is totally different, And it's this reverse culture shock you get. It's I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that was something somebody had long ago had told me that as well. Is once you've lived in another country, no place will really feel like home anymore. You'll always feel like you're missing a little piece of your home. And it was weird to me to walk around when I could speak English with everybody, and the infrastructure works here, and take a lot of things for granted that I didn't really have the same appreciation for until I'd lived out of the United States for a long time. And, I'm very thankful to be here in the U.S. and for everything that we have here. But it was a huge, it was a huge honor for me to be able to come back to my hometown because of the fact that it was full circle, and not to mention full circle to the point where the same karate studio that I originally walked in to train martial arts for the very first time in 1984 is now my jiu-jitsu academy.
No kidding.
So
that's great. But Matt has a question for you.
Compare the food, but Brazil versus Oregon.
Well, you know what? I love steak and seafood, so the food here in Oregon is pretty amazing. But I love the food in Brazil as well. The picanha, if you guys like the churrascarias and feijoada and pão de queijo and açaí and all those things. Açaí in the United States has no comparison.
No, it's
to açaí.
it's like nothing.
It's like, what is this?
Yeah.
It's lunchtime for us.
Yeah, we're thinking about food.
Yeah, yeah. The abundance of fresh fruits and stuff. It was very. It's just amazing to have that. Like almost every corner in Brazil, as you know, Rene, that when you walk around down there, there's juice bars everywhere.
And fruit you've never seen before. There's so many weird fruit. You're like, what is this? And you're like, oh my god, this is the most delicious thing I've ever tasted. What is this? Oh, it's
more
this
than
thing.
Oranges.
Yeah. But I want to just pick your brain. I know we gotta wrap up a little bit, but I want to pick your brain. You've only opened the school for a little, but you have so much experience training with. I know you trained with Rafael dos Anjos and a lot of other MMA fighters. I know you used to train with Babalu a little bit too, right? Didn't you? When he was on Gracie,
absolutely. Babalu was the team captain when
you were there.
Yeah, when I was back in Brazil in 2004, I think and that was a huge thing too. I don't want to get off track or into another subject.
No, go ahead.
Babalu came from a luta libre background, And at the time when he came over, I remember all the black belts like, watch out for the footlocks and, because there was a huge rivalry for years between Lucha Libre and Jiu-Jitsu. And the team manager at the time, Carlos Malta, he was very open-minded, and he brought in these guys that were essentially our opposition for years to be a part of the team. And it was an amazing thing. And it was Bubble, was an excellent team captain and a great guy. And man, he trained his ass off every day. Doesn't matter what kind of shape he was in. If he was tired, if he had jet lag, it didn't matter. He was training, and he was always there and always set a very good example for the other athletes on our team. And that was an amazing experience as well. And
also,
same with,
you trained a lot with Gordo too. It must have been a great experience training with Gordo.
It was. Yeah,
the master of the half guard, for those that don't know.
Yeah, all of that mat time with Gordo and so many of the athletes that were there at the time, and both in Gracie Baja and then in 2007 when Gordo opened his academy in Largo de Baja, which was actually his second academy in Rio, and I was full time training there, and that was it, morning, noon, and night. So it was an amazing experience, and I'm very fortunate to have had it. And he's one of those guys. Gordo has such refined basics and fundamentals that I would, a lot of people when they're blue belts should listen to this as they're coming up. I don't want to do those basics anymore. I've drilled those enough. I've done those enough. But as a brown and black belt, I would volunteer my time. I would say, please make me your uke. I want to join you for the private lessons that you're teaching. Use me. And I did it. I'd be the dummy the whole time. And if I picked up one thing in a lesson, it was all worth it. And believe me, I picked up plenty of stuff from that. And it was definitely worth my while.
It's so interesting you say that, because I think that's also, like, I don't want to get on like the back in our day kind of thing, but the respect for basics is so important. And this actually I wanted to talk to you about just how you approach coaching. Your academy has not been open for that long, but I just watched videos of your students. Their technique is so clean and refined, and I love that. It's like what I want to do. And how do you approach teaching with all these years of experience, going with all these phenomenal athletes? How do you, I'm trying to inculcate a real respect of fundamentals and drilling. I say drillers make killers. Drill. And there's some classes I was like, we're not going to spar today. The sparring class, we're not going to spar. Everybody's going to drill, just mount. What we're going to do is we're going to learn how to do mount. And we're going to just drill mount for 2 hours. And that's what we're going to do. And everybody's like, But no, actually, I'm blessed. I'm blessed with some students. I really don't get that reaction too much. They know. But it's like, that is sort of like what I find is a lot of academies are more in the habit of like making their customers happy than making people into martial artists. So like, okay, we're just going to have some fun rolling today. And everybody's like, oh, great. But then like 2 years later, they're not better.
No, they didn't progress.
They didn't progress. Everybody's happy. They're happy, but they still suck. But anyway, how do you approach your academy, your teaching, or just your philosophy on training for jiu-jitsu, for self-defense, jiu-jitsu for MMA, or just training in general? I would like to pick your brain, because for me, I trained in Brazil. And when I was there, I trained with so many top guys, and I'm very grateful to him. But the best training I experienced was with this purple belt. It's 7 a.m. in Gracie Baja. His name was Dennis Ashe. And it was like, whoa, like part of it was maybe a little bit like 10% was that you actually speak English, but 90% was like this real gift that you have of conveying subtle concepts and teaching. And I'd like to just ask you, our listeners, if they're interested in getting better, either jiu-jitsu or any martial art, because you have such a variety background, how do you approach your philosophy on combat and training and just in general? Big question. Sorry.
I'm going to say, yeah, it's a good question. A big question. Good question. Just taking a step back, since I've been training and teaching in different martial arts for so long, it's kind of an eclectic view on teaching. I give, credit to even the people that taught me how to teach karate, and looking at different learning modalities, visual, kinesthetic, auditory, and how I teach the people. In that sense, I give credit to having been able to teach when I was operating Connection Rio in Brazil. I taught literally thousands of people from all over the world. We had, well over 2,000 guests there. And in addition to teaching, natives in Brazil and such, it really, that allowed me to work on and develop a lot of different methods of teaching. But right from the beginning, I programmed the classes out in advance so that each week correlates with the following week. So I never go into class and I'm okay. Today we're going to work on leg lock, and then tomorrow it's like, okay, well, we're going to work on
armbar,
passing the guards or armbar or something. Everything fits together. So that way, it's for me, it's been the best way to help increase the ability of the students to learn, and it really makes sense. So, and that greatly.
I do the same thing. I actually have a monthly theme, and I just come this 1 month. We do the same thing every single class for the whole month.
Yes, and that makes all the difference.
And then one month is related to the next. Yes,
exactly.
And
that's one of the things I learned from John Machado as far as being able to break a game down and add to it or build on to the best attributes. And I don't shy away from making people work the things that they're having the most difficulty with. But a normal class for us, we don't do any traditional warm-ups. And I've been like that for well over a decade. That's how my classes have been. I don't do jumping jacks, push-ups, anything like that. Aside from, I take that back. In a kids class, we'll do push-ups as a disciplinary action, but we call it the push-up game. So they actually enjoy doing it. But in the adult class, we start out with solo drills or line drills, where we work the individual footwork and movements that go behind the techniques. We go right from that into partner drills, and even some of the line drills are with partners. From there, we move on to partner drills on the mat, and then we do our takedowns and throws. First, just the entries, then all the way to the mat, executing the takedowns and throws. We'll stretch out for a few minutes, and then we head into technique. And as I said, it correlates with the day before, the week before, and is setting you up to be able to add that to the next week's classes. After that, I focus on positional sparring, and we do that every single class. We always have positional sparring. So if we're working on a set of moves or any specific part of our game, that we're going to be working that in our positional sparring. So it helps to bridge the gap. It's not like, okay, here's the technique. All right, let's go spar. It's you're going to have to work out of that specific position, and it's great for people that it helps to develop the game as well. Because if you're really a half guard player and you're forced to play guard passing game from spider guard or something, then it's gonna help you to open your mind and really expand your jiu-jitsu. And then from there we go into our free training or our sparring, and then after that we cool down with sweeps. So even after you're tired, you still have to be able to function technically and apply your sweeps, and that's an average class for us.
That's great. That's fantastic. I'm going to steal some of those. But it's funny because I'm very happy that I see a tremendous overlap of what you do and what I do, but I can also see some improvement from my classes too. But I
Awesome.
think we're seeing the same thing. And I think maybe it's also because we come from the Machado background and they're just so gifted, especially Carlos, who's like one of the most brilliant teachers I've ever seen in my life. Of course, all the Machado brothers are. Hegan would just say one word to me and I'd be like, oh my God, that changed my game 1,000%. That there's one word, here, huh? Oh my God, like this. And Jean-Jacques Machado, for the people who don't know, he's missing his hand, and he's one of the best grapplers in the world. And in a grappling sport, a gripping sport, to have missing a hand or fingers on your hand, and to be so amazing.
Only the thumb.
He's unbelievable, and his ability to create champions and super technical. The brothers are fantastic people, and I think you and I both can tell that we are so fortunate to have encountered them. But I also want to say that I am so fortunate to have met you. You are one of those people that I said, he's the guy that I'm going to compare myself, not in a, I'm going to aspire to, not compare, but I'm going to aspire to when I have that level of technical excellence and that level of ability to teach and that level of ability to communicate and to go forth and just to carry yourself. Like, I have never seen you act in any way that wasn't just, I'm like, wow, he's he's himself. He's authentic. You know, we had John Will on recently too, and you remind me of him, a younger version. You guys are just super authentic people who, wherever you are, people are more joyful. And it was such, I look back on my time in Brazil, and of course I had some great training with a lot of wonderful people, but, including Jenny Habello and Cyril Azevedo and so many guys, Soneca a little bit. But a person who made the most impact on my game was you. And to this day, like yesterday, I was teaching something you taught me. You know, that Americana, when they pin you in the side control and you hit them in Americana, that whole sequence you do. I still remember. I drill it like once a week, period. You know, like, you know the one I'm talking about, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. You made me drill that like 500 times.
That too.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I really appreciate you making time to tell me that. That does mean a lot. No, I'm glad that I was able to make an impact on your jiu-jitsu journey. That's awesome to hear. Yeah. And thank you for passing along those techniques. That's really important too. It doesn't stop with us. It's, you know, it goes on to the next generation,
absolutely,
the next people. So
I tell you, we're only one link in a chain. You know, like I can trace my lineage in judo, traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu, and all the way back to the 16th century. And the same thing with my link in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. You know, we're this link all the way to ancient Japan. And, you know, there's the link going forward too. So we have a responsibility to the next generation. But, you know, you are a person who's also bridged the old, you know, the Valley Tudo world and the modern jiu-jitsu world. And we can see its changes. And, you know, I hope one day not only will I visit, but I can take a whole bunch of my students over so they can experience your teaching as well. And if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I know you're in Bend, Oregon. Is it still connectionrio.com that you use as your website or contact information?
ConnectionRioBJJ.com.
Got it.
Yes, sir.
And anybody who gets a chance to train with Professor Ashe, you will not regret it. This man is unbelievable. Like, people talk about John Danaher, blah, blah, blah. You know, of course he's great too, but, you know, you're up there, one of the greats. And thank you for taking so much time.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking so much time to speak with us. And the only thing is, like, I know so much more about you that you're so humble. You don't say that, I was a main training partner of a UFC champion, you know.
No big deal.
Yeah, no big deal. But thank you so much. I hope we can have you come on again and we can maybe even discuss fights or something like that, because you're truly brilliant, and I would love to pick your brain even more.
Thank you. Anytime. Pleasure's mine.
Wonderful.
And it's been an honor to be on your show.
Thanks. I'll see you soon. Talk to you soon.
Lived up to the hype, my man.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.
All right. You too. Bye.